Hi everyone, I'm Evon Hekkala. I'm a professor at Fordham University and I'm also a research associate here at the American Museum of Natural History where I study crocodiles among other things. One of the things that I like to do is work with historical museum collections to try to understand how populations of wild animals have changed over time. So for instance, just yesterday I was in the collections of the crocodiles here at the American Museum in the herpetology department, sampling specimens so that we can try to look at their DNA to see how populations have changed over the last 100 years. So that's one of the things I do. Today what I really want to do though is share some of the highlights of the Crocs exhibit with you. So this exhibit, Crocs, Ancient Predators in a Modern World, is really great, a great opportunity to teach people about some of the unique features of crocodilians that a lot of people I'm sure aren't aware of. And one of the things we're going to start with is a little bit of a tour of some of the live Crocs that we have here today. So before I get started, one thing I want to clarify is that when you say Crocs, there are two ways to use that word. One is crocodilians, which this exhibition is about, and then the other is Crocs, which are the true crocodiles, the genus Crocodilus, and there are a lot of those still around today. So I'll talk a little bit more about those later. Today I want to start with one of our live guys. He's the African dwarf crocodile. His scientific name is Osteolaemus. It means he's got bony plates all over him. And even though this guy is actually quite large for his species, they tend to be the smallest of the living true crocodiles. And one of the really exciting things about this species is that here at the American Museum of Natural History a few years ago, my colleagues discovered that this was not just one species, but actually three separate species. And one of the first people who discovered that and described that was actually a herpetologist here at the American Museum of Natural History in around 1913 or 1920. So these guys are forest dwellers in the Congo in Africa, and unfortunately they're not doing very well in terms of conservation because people tend to like to capture them for what's called the bushmeat trade. So they use them for meat. Now there's a lot going on right now with conservation of them, and hopefully they're going to be doing better in the near future. So that is the African dwarf crocodile, and as I said, this is kind of a large one, but still awfully cute. And hopefully he'll be out and active when you're here visiting. So let's go see one of the other ones, and on the way we'll look at some of the other exhibits. So one of our most popular ones is the American alligator hatchlings that we have here, and that's these little guys, or gals, I'm not sure what sex they are. And one of the interesting things about all crocodilians is they have what's called temperature-dependent sex determination. That means if they're a boy or a girl depends not on what chromosomes they have, but on whether or not they are hatched or they are incubated as eggs at a particular temperature. Now this is interesting because, as most of you know, there's an issue right now with respect to climate change, and as temperatures warm, that could actually impact populations of all living crocodilians. And these guys are great because they also exhibit a lot of maternal behavior. So they're great moms. Their moms call them and take care of them and bring them down to the water when they're hatching. And as you can see, they're awfully cute, so it would be hard to resist them. A couple little factoids about these guys. One is that I said I work on crocodiles, I don't work on alligators. And you may think that because crocodiles and alligators look pretty similar, that anybody who worked on a crocodile would probably work on an alligator as well. But actually, these guys are really, they're crocodilians, but alligators and crocodiles split off from each other about 65 million to 100 million years ago. So that's a really long time ago. And I like to tell people, for example, 65 million years ago was about as far back as when the lineage that led to humans split off from the lineage that led to bats and dogs. So they've been separated for a really long time, and they just have this great body plan, this armored aquatic predator that allows them to be very successful in particular environments. And so that's one factoid about these guys. Ooh, here's one that's swimming. Isn't he cute? Unfortunately, they're so cute that in the past past, there's been an awful lot of selling these guys in the pet trade, and that's part of where the mythology of the crocodiles and alligators in the sewers of New York City came from. So people would bring these guys home from their Florida vacation when they were little cute guys, and then when they were older, they'd decide to get rid of them. And usually they didn't try to flush them down the toilet, they would actually dump them in a lake. And this has happened in a few cities in North America. San Francisco and New York have had alligators and crocodiles in their local lakes that the local animal control people have had to come and fish them out. So these guys make great little chirping sounds when they're talking to their moms, and when you come to the exhibit you can actually push buttons and hear all the different ways that little alligators and crocodiles speak to their parents and to each other. So let's move around and see some of the other exhibits. We have over here, well, let's just take a look real quick at the other side of the alligator and the hatchling exhibit. So I'm going to just take 1 minute to remind everyone who I am in case you just tuned in. I'm Evon Hekkala, and I'm a research associate here at the American Crocs, Ancient Predators in a Modern World exhibit today on Facebook. And so this here is an exhibit of a American alligator mother over her nest, and we just discussed the fact that the little hatchlings, which you can see live on the other side, when they're ready to hatch out, they make chirping sounds in the nest, and the mothers will come over and they'll help carry the eggs or the hatchlings down to the water after sometimes they help crack open the eggs. And in the early observations of crocodilians, true crocodiles and alligators, people thought that they were actually eating the babies, that they were cannibals. And now we know that that's actually maternal care. And there is even a species that has paternal care, which is this long-snouted gavial that has what they call creches, like a nursery, where all the babies come and the males and the females can take care of them. Let's go talk about one of our other live species that we have here. We have well, first we have to, of course, we have to say hi to Gomek, Gomek was a real crocodile, a saltwater crocodile from Australia that was in captivity for many, many years. And this is a life-size replica of Gomek. And he was a very impressive crocodilian, a true crocodile. And they can actually grow even larger than this. And so I believe he was 23 feet long when he passed away. I may be slightly off about that. But you can come take your picture next to Gomek, and that will be exciting and fun, and you can share that with all your friends. Behind me...
Evon, before we get to this next species, we have a question from Facebook Live from Wayne Manzour asking, have we outlawed the selling of hatchlings to or at pet stores here in the U.S.?
Well, that's a great question, Wayne. So, as many of you may know, there are still lots of places that you can acquire exotic animals in the pet trade, and some of them are legal and some of them are not legal. In some places, there's still a legal pet trade in exotic herps. In Florida, there's some legal pet trade, and actually, I have to say, I'm not certain about crocodilians. I think they're illegal at this point as hatchlings. They're certainly illegal to have in New York City, where we live here, we're hoping that as people learn more about crocodilians and about exotic reptiles in particular, that they may understand that there's potential danger to having them in the pet trade. You may have heard recently about the Nile crocodiles that have escaped into the wild in Florida, and that they could potentially cause a threat to wildlife there. Not necessarily to people, but they are more likely to potentially go after a person than our native crocodile there, the American crocodile, which is still a protected species. So let's talk a little bit about these guys. That was a great question. This is the Central African slender-snouted crocodile, and this is another species that research by my colleagues actually has shown that they believe that the slender-snouted crocodile may also be more than one species. So one of the things that's happening today with genetic techniques is that we're learning that a lot of species that look really similar may actually be multiple species. So these little guys like to hang out underneath these tree branches in their exhibit, and one of the interesting things about this species is that if you go to Africa and you see them in the wild, sometimes they actually hang out on branches above the river. If you're kayaking or canoeing and looking along the waterways, they'll be above you rather than below you. And they don't typically jump down on people, so you don't have to worry about that. But this is a very interesting species, and it's also found in Africa in the Congo rainforest. So let's take a look at one of the things that I would like to take one moment to talk about is that people have spent thousands and thousands of years living with crocodiles in many places around the earth, and they've developed cultural belief systems around crocodiles. And one of the really interesting ones to me is the ancient Egyptians who worshiped crocodiles and thought that they represented health and fertility. And so my lab's actually doing some really interesting research on why people worship crocodiles in different contexts and whether or not their beliefs about the aspects of crocodiles that make them seem to be particularly healthy in the face of infectious disease. Maybe we can learn something about human medicine from how crocodiles defend themselves against pathogens. So that's an exciting part of my research. Another thing is just understanding how people's belief systems relate to their interplay with crocodile conservation. And so in New Guinea, people worship crocodiles. In Africa, in Madagascar in particular, a lot of people believe that crocodiles are their ancestors. And so there are a lot of really long historical associations between people and crocodiles. Another really cool thing that I've been working on is this thing we call the crocodilus apothecary hypothesis, which is that in the Middle Ages, people would hang crocodiles from their ceilings, and that was because they believed that crocodiles had healing powers. So that was sort of an interesting mixture of art and science, and hopefully we'll have more to update you with about that soon. So let's... We have
another couple questions from Facebook. People are very curious. We got from Rose Rivera and David Cosgrove. What is the largest that crocodiles get in the wild? And Rose also wanted to know, how long do they live?
Well, those are both great questions. So it depends is the answer to the how large they get, because it depends on whether you're measuring length or weight. So some are much heavier than others, and some can be longer than others. So some of the records, I believe, for Nile crocodiles are about 25 feet long for historical populations. We haven't seen them that large for a long time because, of course, as many of you probably know, crocodilians were over-harvested and persecuted as predators for a long time, and by the 1970s, most of them were endangered. So a lot of the biggest ones we didn't ever actually get to see. The lengthwise, the slender snouted gavialids, they're these really weird ones. They get really long and their heads get quite large. So this is a little example of one in this diorama right here. But if you can imagine one of these that's 25, 26 feet long, and their heads can be about, I'll stand in front here and show you, their heads can be about this long. And we actually have some of their skulls in the collection here at the American Museum of Natural History. Really, really impressive animals. These are the guys that take care of their young. Both the males and the females take care of their young. And
we have one other question from Frankie Figs on Facebook. And that, is it true that crocodiles have made their way into Florida?
So that was, I spoke about that just a minute ago. So we have a native crocodile in Florida, and a lot of people, I'm going to step back for 1 second and say that most people don't realize that there's more than just one crocodile, true crocodile. There are at least 12 species, probably now we think 13 to 15 species when we look at the DNA, but we have a native crocodile in North America called the American crocodile, not the American alligator, not to be confused with the American alligator. It's a protected species. There are four total species of true crocodiles in the Caribbean. So there's the Morlet's crocodile, there's the Cuban crocodile found only on Cuba, a really cool animal, the American crocodile, which can actually go around all of the sort of estuarine areas of the Caribbean, and the Orinoco crocodile. So there are a lot more crocodiles than most people realize, but they just discovered that the crocodiles that were released from some captive places in Florida are Nile crocodiles, and those are the true Nile crocodiles. Now, one thing I didn't talk about yet, and we could talk about in a minute, maybe we'll walk over to the Egyptian crocodile panel for a second, and I can tell you a little bit about one of the things that I discovered when I was researching Nile crocodiles for my own research was that Nile crocodiles are actually 2 species as well. So things keep coming up that there are more species than we thought, and that's partly because crocodiles look really similar to each other. It's really hard for even an expert to tell the true crocodiles apart. A lot of people, our first question we get is, how do you tell an alligator from a crocodile? And so let me just take a second to tell you, alligators typically, they have an overbite. You can see all their upper teeth over their lower jaw. And crocodiles, they have sort of interwoven teeth like this. That's one good way to tell them apart. But within the true crocodiles, they're hard to tell apart, which is why for many, many years, people didn't realize that the Nile crocodile throughout mainland Africa and Madagascar was actually more than one species until we looked at the DNA. And one of the cool things that happened was I decided to look at DNA from ancient Egyptian crocodile mummies to help me understand the relationships between the different populations of Nile crocodiles. And what I found is that the Nile crocodile is 2 totally separate species. They're not even each other's closest relatives. So the Nile crocodiles introduced into Florida right now are the true Nile crocodile, and they are related to the Caribbean crocodiles, which could be a big conservation issue if they started to hybridize. The other crocodile in Africa that I didn't actually discover, I rediscovered. Somebody else had discovered it in 1807. The sacred crocodile is actually thought to be, quite a bit less aggressive than the Nile crocodile, although I wouldn't suggest you go up and try to pet them or anything. But the sacred crocodile is found in Central and West Africa and was originally historically found in the Nile, where the Egyptians actually not just mummified them, but they worshipped them and they kept them in temples. And they actually realized that there were 2 different species of crocodiles in the Nile, way before we even had genetic techniques. So that was a pretty exciting discovery. So let's take a minute and come over here and look at the Siamese crocodiles, but it looks like we may have time for a few more questions. Once again, I'm Evon Hekkala. I'm a professor at Fordham University and a research associate here at the American Museum of Natural History. And I'm giving a little tour on live Facebook about the new Crocs exhibit here at the American Museum. So we're going to go take a peek at this Siamese crocodile, which is a really interesting species. And these guys, oh, look, they're out. They're basking right now. So the Siamese crocodile is a critically endangered crocodile that's found only in Southeast Asia, and this species is particularly interesting because it's one of the species that people have actually begun to study its genome and found that its blood has amazing antimicrobial properties, and we want to know why and how it's able to fend off these pathogens using molecules in its blood. And so we can learn a lot from nature about how to create new antibiotics and things, but the key is to keep these animals around so that we can actually learn from them. So lots of new discoveries are being made looking at the genomes of everything from cone snails. One of our colleagues here at the American Museum works on venomous cone snails. Other people work on rattlesnake venom. I work on crocodiles, and I'm looking at the crocodile genome. And we're learning so much from animals about how to create novel molecules that allow animals to live in different environments and have different adaptations. The key to that, though, is to protecting the species so that we can actually learn from them. And of course, we want to protect them for other reasons, partly because they're really important in the ecosystem. So all crocodilians are actually what we call architects of their landscape. So they create troughs in waterways that create habitat for other species. They're important predators for other organisms, and they keep populations stable. And these guys, the Siamese crocodiles, really need a lot of help right now, and the Wildlife Conservation Society here in New York City is working on a reintroduction program for these guys in the wild. And one of the things that I worked on was getting DNA from some of their eggs to see if they were pure Siamese crocodiles that could be released into the wild. So these are the Siamese crocodiles, and I believe there are 3 total in here. One's hiding right now. But you can come see these guys. This is an endangered species that is important in so many ways, and I'm really glad to see them here at this exhibit. So do we have any other questions right now?
We have a couple more questions from Facebook.
All right.
One's from William Steffen here, and why do Crocs pass out when they're flipped over?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Well, it probably has something to do with the part of their brain that's involved in balance. And I don't particularly use that trick when I'm handling crocodiles, but it probably has to do with something in their brain that's involved in balance. One thing that I think it's important for people to know is we see a lot of images of people going up to wild crocodilians and wanting to interact with them. And even though most of the time a crocodile will run away from a person, there are instances when they wouldn't. For instance, if they're defending a nest, which you may not know that there's a nest nearby, or if they become habituated to people. And so you never want to go up to a crocodilian of any kind and bother it. So if you see an animal, don't go up and try and flip it over. Don't go up to it at all. Stay your distance and take some photos maybe. Maybe let some other people know that you saw an amazing animal in the wild. Do we have another question?
I think we have one more question. It's going to be our last. How long can a crocodile stay underwater? And that's from Rose Rivera on Facebook.
Oh, well, thanks, Rose. That's a really good question. That's another one of those things where it depends. So it depends partly on the time of the year and how cold the water is. So I believe that some species can stay underwater 40 minutes to an hour. And it depends on if the water is very, very cold. Crocodilians do what's called, they go into torpor, and they can kind of slow their metabolism down when it's chilly. And so then they can stay under the water longer. There's a buzzing right here, so let's move over here for just a second to finish up, maybe beside Gomek. We can say goodbye to Gomek, and if there are any of you who want to come and see the exhibit, it's open now. It's open through next winter. And here's Gomek. He's pretty impressive. You can see. You can get your picture taken right beside him. And he's always a nice representative of our amazing crocodilians that are alive today in the world. And what a valuable resource they are, and what just terrific and interesting animals they are to work with. I'm really happy that I got to spend time with you guys today. Do we have any?
You know what? We had one more question from Hope Miller Goodell on Facebook, and her 4-year-old son is obsessed with Crocs, and so she wanted to know, and it's a great thing to go out on, what's the coolest piece of information you could give about Crocs?
Oh, the coolest piece of information for me. Let me see. This is going to sound kind of silly, but most people think that crocodiles, because of their skin and the bony scutes underneath, they look like they're hard. And actually, if you ever touch a crocodile, if you ever get to touch a crocodile, they're unbelievably soft. Their skin their skin feels as soft as baby skin. It's very, very soft. And I once did a little project with some school kids in Madagascar where we were teaching them about the natural history of crocodiles so that they could be safe with the crocodiles that they live near. And they got to come up and touch the crocodile that we had captured. They got to touch her foot. And every one of them said, "Oh, it's so soft. It's so soft." So most people think that when they touch like a handbag or a piece of luggage or a pair of boots made of crocodile, that they're actually touching a real crocodile, but they don't really feel like that. That's just when you turn them into leather. So they're surprisingly soft and interesting, and I love the fact also that they have social behavior and culture just like people do. So thank you so much for your questions, and I hope that you'll follow up and look more into research on crocodilians.
Can we find the space for these powerful predators?
Very specialized fish eaters, so they pose very little threat to humans. And they're living with humans in this environment in the shallow everyday.
Crocodilians and human societies have had a complex relationship. We recognize their extreme power. We've worshipped them as deities. We've included them in our art, and we've hunted them to near extinction. The future of crocodilians depends on us. Can we find the space for these powerful predators? Crocodilians in human societies have had